All rise, please.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Barr.
Mr. Moss, can we go back to school now, please? And have up on the screen UCPI 5034698. This is another circular from the Security Service to Chief Constables about subversive activities. It's dated the 16th of December 1975, and it's about subversive activities in schools. If we could go to the second page, paragraph 2, please. It says, "We do not ask you to make inquiries in schools on our behalf, but we would welcome any help you could give us on the basis of information which comes your way from the local papers or from members of the public, or by recourse to other sources outside schools which you can use without risk of embarrassment." Did you see that document?
Not at the time, but I was aware. I have been made aware of it.
Were you aware at the time of the message that was contained in paragraph 2?
No, I wasn't.
Were you aware by the time that you were the DCI of the SDS of that message?
I think I might have been, but wouldn't swear to it.
There is tension within schools, isn't there, with both the far left and far right seeking to influence views within schools in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yes.
And the SDS reported on that, didn't they?
I believe so.
Yeah, we've had reporting from
fine.
HN126 in particular about that. Were you aware of what that was for and who the driver was for that intelligence?
I'm not sure I've seen the intelligence you're talking about, but I'm guessing that it was the security service and it was in pursuance of that letter or circular.
Should I take it from the uncertainty in your voice that perhaps we'd be best relying on the officer himself?
Yes, sir, I think so.
Thank you. Can we take that down? I asked you before lunch about the procedure with documents when you were on C Squad. I'm going to ask you a little bit about the procedures within the SDS. You've told us in your witness statement that you didn't compile or assess reports. You did read them and sign them off, though, didn't you?
Sometimes, so yes.
And then were they disseminated to C Squad?
Yes, sir.
And then the process that you described was applied to them, and they were further disseminated as C Squad saw
Yes,
fit. Was there any change in that process during the time that you were working in the SDS?
No.
You've confirmed in your witness statement what I would describe as, and do tell me if you disagree with the choice of words, an unfiltered approach to intelligence gathering, where your officers hoovered up information so that it could be considered and analysed by others.
That's a fair comment, sir.
You've made a comment on a number of reports in your witness statement, and I'm not going to take you to them all, but could I take you just to a couple? First of all, can we go to the document at tab 19, which is UCPI 5015145. And this is a report dated the 5th of November 1980, and it's about an individual. It says at paragraph 2, privacy, has recently joined Kilburn branch of the Socialist Workers' Party. He is employed by the General Post Office in the International Sorting Office at location. Due to his shift work, he is unable to attend SWP meetings, but he does a regular Socialist Worker newspaper sale in Finchley Road, NW3, each Saturday. Can you keep in mind employment at the GPO? Then goes on to deal with where he's living and a bank account, and then it talks in terms of being a supporter of the gay liberation movement and as an avid reader of gay news. You thought that that intelligence might be of some relevance for vetting purposes in your witness statement.
Yes, sir.
Could you explain, please, what the relevance of this intelligence to vetting might be?
To vetting, as I was describing it, none at all, sir. I was trying to differentiate between the official government vetting system, which is aimed at preventing unsuitable people in terms of their views and attitudes having access to classified government information, and blacklisting as it's been described.
Yeah, two different things.
They are two different things, yes. So in terms of government vetting purposes, that is of no interest whatsoever.
It was the fact that this person was working for the post office, potentially of vetting relevance.
In government terms?
Yes.
No, sir. I don't believe... There may be some posts in the post office, pardon me, which are vetted to government standards, but I'm not aware of any. I can't see why they would be.
So is it your evidence now that, in fact, you don't think this document is of any relevance to vetting?
No, sir, I don't think it is. I think it's just a question of identifying the person as much as possible.
So far as bank account details are concerned, did you regard these as having any quality of confidentiality that ought to make you cautious about signing off reports containing them?
With hindsight, probably yes.
At the time?
No. It was a different time, sir.
Could we take that report down, please? And could we go to a document which, in fact, wasn't in the bundle? It's UCPI 5014174. Thank you. This is a report dated the 8th of August 1980, and it deals with information about a member of the revolutionary communist tendency. Can we have a look in particular? It starts about that, but in particular, I want to have a look at what it says about a particular woman. At paragraph 6, please, at the bottom of the page. Since that time, she has been unattached until recently, when she formed a relationship with a bus conductor on the Privacy bus route called Privacy, a black belt karate exponent, and it is likely that this liaison will blossom, although the two characters prefer at present to maintain their independence. However, she still lives at Privacy, and in the last week has intimated that she wishes to fall pregnant again, and for this purpose has ceased to take the pill on a regular basis. She is, however, not quite sure at present as to who will sire this latest socialist offspring. If we could go down to the next page and look at paragraph 9, please. It says, whilst not actively engaged on a firm political basis, she had still retained close links on a social basis with her many friends in the Tottenham Socialist Workers' Party and having a Tottenham woman's voice. And it can be stated quite strongly that her current political bias would not include an interest in Irish-orientated groups, let alone the ideals of the revolutionary communist tendency as her main interest, culturally, politically and personally, is with the black races and persons of similar ethnic origins. Now, if we scroll down to the very bottom, please. And we see that you've signed there on behalf of the Chief Superintendent. So is that one of the documents that you would have read?
Yes, if I signed it, yes, certainly.
Did you consider content like that, first of all, to be necessary?
Yes, I think it's relevant in that I obviously don't know the subject. I don't know anything about her from this distance in time. I think the relevance is that it shows her possibly becoming less active in ultra-left-wing circles, looking perhaps to settle down a bit more, and certainly if she does become a mother again, she would have less time for activity. So it would be indicating to me that this particular person was likely to be taking less interest in activities in the future. That's what I would see as the relevance.
Did you consider the tone appropriate?
I thought one of the sentences was a bit odd, and I'm not sure in today's light, I haven't got it in front of me anymore.
If we could go back, which bit would you like to look at again?
I think it was probably the bottom of the first page.
Yeah, so paragraph 6, please.
Well, I didn't like that sentence, not quite sure at present as to who will sire this latest socialist offspring. That was very poorly phrased, to say the least. And in the present climate, I'm not sure I like the way that they talked about her interest being concentrated in certain ethnic minorities.
And at the time?
I probably didn't think about it at the time. So it was a long time, a different time, sir.
In coming back to the significance of this report as you saw it, in terms of the content, couldn't that have been recorded much more succinctly and without the details?
I suppose my views on that, thinking that of the security services interest, is that you said, did the SDS hoover up things? I think the security service do very much the same. And I suppose my view would be, if we had that information, and it's all relevant as far as I can see, to her as a person, I would pass that on to the security service.
Looking back now with hindsight, would you accept that this was inappropriate reporting?
In what way, sir?
Well, inappropriate both in terms of the level of highly personal detail and secondly the tone.
I think the tone would be unacceptable now. Yes, sir.
And the level of detail more than was necessary?
Well, I suppose, for example, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, but in paragraph 5, when she's talking about, when the author is talking about having formed a relationship with the National Treasurer of Flame, that could have been sort of left off her report and put on his report.
I'm thinking of the detail of contraception, speculation about who the father of her child might be, as well as the comments about race that you've already mentioned.
Well, I've commented on that, sir.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying now. Yes, I suppose it could have stopped at the end of intimated that she wishes to fall pregnant again. And the rest of that paragraph could be left out.
One of the reasons I've chosen to put this document to you, not only does it occur on your watch, but it falls at precisely the time that concerns were being expressed in the Home Office, amongst other things, to the effect that more information was being recorded than was necessary and then stored. So that was a concern that they had at the time. Would you agree that that was a justified concern to have?
Yes, with modern eyes, I would agree with that, sir.
Well, thank you. Can we move, now if you can take that document down, can we move to Blair Peach? And can we start, please, with whether you can recall in any general discussion whilst you were the head of the SDS or in the period between Blair Peach's death and your assuming that role, about whether what the police concerns were arising from that incident?
No, sir. I mean, I was in the CID until quite literally the day before I took over the SDS in that January. So that answers that part of the question. As far as the second part is concerned, I imagine that the main interest was in any public disorder arising from those tragic circumstances.
When you say you imagine, in the conversations you were having with people at C Squad and your superiors in S Squad, was anybody feeding down to you any desire for intelligence about the Friends of Blair Peach campaign?
Not in specific terms, no, sir.
In general terms?
No.
Was anybody else expressing to you a desire for intelligence about the Friends of Blair Peach campaign?
Not quite sure where this is going, sir, but no. I'm not sure I'm giving you the answer you're looking for.
Was anybody asking you for information in connection with the inquest or with any other proceedings that were going on at the time arising from the death? Could we look at Doc 076, please? This is a report dated the 19th of June 1979. As far as the inquiry is aware, this isn't SDS reporting. But it says, this report concerns those persons known to this branch who have made written statements to police concerning the death of Blair Peach during an anti-National Front demonstration at Southall on the 23rd of April 1979. Are you able to assist us in any way as to why such intelligence would have been wanted by Special Branch?
No, I can't, sir.
Can we take that down and have Doc 077 up, please? This is, again, a document which we don't, our understanding is this isn't SDS intelligence. It's dated the 19th of February 1981. In connection with the investigation into the death of Blair Peach on the 23rd of April 1979, a number of persons met, redacted, later that evening. It is understood that the reason for this meeting was to collectively discuss individual statements which would later be made to police. Can you help us as to why Special Branch would be interested in that intelligence?
Well, I suppose my immediate reaction to that is, were they meeting for reasons of collusion? And I don't see that Special Branch per se would have interest in that unless the people were known to us. But even then, I can see a reason for police interest in that, but not special branch interest in that.
If we could take that down now, please, and if we could have up the document which is at tab 10 of the bundle, which is MPS-0728-963. Now, this is the 1979 annual report, and it describes seeking, in relation to Blair Peach, seeking to discredit and criticise the police. I think you were asked to comment on it in your witness statement.
Sorry, I'm not sure I've got the right document here, sir.
I will take you to the precise paragraph in just a moment. If we can go over to the next page, to paragraph 3. It says, this is one of the letters. This is a letter from Assistant Commissioner Kelland to R.J. Andrew at the Home Office. Paragraph 3 says, the focal point of much of the extremist activity in 1979 was the general election held in May, with the extreme left contriving to take advantage of the National Front's election campaign to provoke hostile confrontation whenever possible. The culmination of the virulent anti-fascist demonstrations was the death of the anti-Nazi League supporter Blair Peach and the subsequent campaign against police. During this period, the Special Demonstration Squad was able to provide useful information which was invaluable, enabling uniformed officers to be effectively deployed. Was it a concern of the police, in the light of the two reports I've shown you and the annual report for 1979, that the SWP, the ANL, or the Friends of Blair Peach campaign were trying to discredit or criticise the police?
I read that, it's perhaps unfortunately phrased in the sentence beginning the culmination of the virulent anti-fascist, etc., and the subsequent campaign against the police. That perhaps shouldn't have been there, and it should have just finished with the last sentence, which I think comes back to the function of the SDS, that it was able to provide useful information, enabling uniformed officers to be effectively deployed. I would personally have no problem at all with criticism of the police for anything that we do. We live in a democratic society.
Well, is the problem that that phrase was there in the document, and do you think, looking back, there might have been a rather defensive mindset?
Yes, quite possibly. I was giving you my personal view then, but corporately, yes, quite possibly.
Could we take that down, please, now, and have tab 15, UCPI 5014149. Now, this is an SDS report. It's dated the 28th of July 1980, and it is about the Friends of Blair Peach Committee attempting to form a national coordinating body with other groups who are concerned, as the report puts it, with state brutality by the police and prison authorities. Can you help as to why this intelligence was reported by the SDS? Was it just part of the hoovering up approach, or was it because there was a particular interest at that time in the Friends of Blair Peach Committee?
I'm again speculating, but I assume, and I believe there were, demonstrations outside police stations and other places in support of all these people. quite justifiably, of course. But it gave our uniform colleagues, at least it would give our uniform colleagues advance notice of those demonstrations to allow them to be, not to stop them, but to enable them to police them properly.
There were indeed demonstrations, and there is another report in the pack about one of those, but I don't think we need to go to it now. Could we take that down, please? Can you recall whether you got any feedback from any source, whether the security service, C Squad, uniform police, anybody within police circles, about SDS reporting in connection with the death of Blair Peach and the subsequent justice campaign?
I don't remember getting any feedback, no.
One of the officers who gave evidence anonymously at a closed hearing says that he was at the Southall demonstration and that he gave a witness statement to police about it. Can you recall that?
When was the demonstration, sir?
It was St George's Day, 1979.
That's before my time.
We don't know exactly when the statement was taken, whether it was immediately afterwards or not. Do you know anything about any SDS undercover officer giving a witness statement to police in connection with that demonstration?
I don't know, sir.
Were you aware that Blair Peach was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party?
Not at the time, but from subsequent reporting, yes.
Your witness statement talks about the SWP piggybacking onto Blair Peach's death. Wouldn't it be fairer to recognise that Blair Peach was one of their own?
It probably would, sir, yes.
Would you accept that this was a justice campaign which ultimately did secure some justice?
I would.
Can I zoom out from the Blair Peach campaign to justice campaigns more generally? Did you ever get, as far as you can recall, particular requests from anybody to obtain intelligence about a justice campaign?
No.
And was there any reason, over and above the unfiltered hoovering up approach, why justice campaigns were reported on?
In connection with the potential for public disorder of a minor or large scale.
That takes us to public disorder. Can we start at tab 22 with the annual report for 1980? That's MPS-0728-962. And in that report, could we go to page 8, please? Paragraph 17. Paragraph 17 reads, anti-fascist activity continued to tax the resources of the Metropolitan Police, and in February, March, April and June there were right-wing marches which attracted counter-demonstrations from many sections of the revolutionary left. It's right, isn't it, that tension between the far left and the far right was a major theme of the time when you were head of the SDS?
Absolutely, for both years.
We've heard evidence that anti-fascist groups had a policy of confronting the fascists on the street. Was it your view that one side or the other was causing the trouble?
Yes, it was.
And what was your view?
Well, abhorrent as it may appear, I wonder whether, had the NF been allowed to march and not been confronted by the left, would there have been any disorder? sorry, I didn't, abhorrent as their views may appear is what I meant to say, because it was the left that caused the disorder in those circumstances. And it was always a matter for debate within the police service how far the police should go to facilitate free speech. In other words, I remember seeing press cuttings of forces elsewhere in the country who had an absolute phalanx of police protecting 10 National Front people with the Union flag marching down the middle of the street. And a question for debate was, and there were arguments on both sides and people supporting both sides, whether that was the correct use of police manpower. So what I'm saying in rather a lengthy way is if the National Front had just been allowed to demonstrate and the left wing hadn't turned up, there probably wouldn't have been any disorder, in my opinion.
Can we pick up on some evidence given yesterday? What would have happened if the left and right had been allowed to appear without a police presence?
Oh, it would have been mayhem.
Can I move now specifically to the Right to Work March of 1980? If we can take down the present document and have up UCPI 14264. Just want to have a look at some of the preemptive. This is dated the 15th of September 1980, and the March hits the Conservative conference in October. So this is preemptive intelligence. If we could go, please, to page 2 and paragraph 9. It says, with regard to the march itself, if it is intended that approximately 100 unemployed youngsters will make the journey from Port Talbot via London to Brighton, although it is anticipated that on the last 3 days of the march, when it leaves Croydon, these numbers could grow to something in excess of 400. This part of the project is not seen as a great threat to public order, other than problems resulting from youthful exuberance of the marchers, drunkenness and minor breaches of the peace at places where the march stops for the night. At each location where the march arrives, civic receptions have been arranged where the local council is deemed to be friendly. Meetings will be held with guest speakers and entertainment in the form of live music will be offered where available. And it speaks about a timetable of activities. Paragraph 10, with regard to the pickets outside the Conservative Party conference on Friday the 10th of October, the situation relating to possible public disorder is completely different. The Socialist Workers' Party has throughout the past 5 months been building steadily towards totally disrupting the final day of the conference by whatever means they consider necessary. If we could take that down, please. What I'd like to explore with you is how well publicised was the Right to Work march before it took place?
I have no idea, sir.
Was it entirely predictable that there would be trouble at the Conservative Party conference?
Not necessarily. It comes back to what I was saying about knowing individuals, knowing what their proclivities were towards violence or peaceful demonstration, and assessing it from there. So, possible, not entirely predictable.
It was 1980 in the first.
In the first, as I said,
very early days.
The two years of the 1980-81, the difficult years. So, putting it in context there, I suppose, it was probable, if not entirely predictable.
The march is described in an ex post facto report that we can find at UCPI 5014610. And if we go to page 5 and paragraph 24, please. It soon became apparent to the marchers that the event was receiving an unexpected amount of coverage by both the local and national media, which made the organisers instil rigid discipline amongst the marchers. This tended to dampen the spirits of the more unruly elements and resulted in little public order during the first 2 weeks. Indeed, the council decided to ban 5 individuals from continuing on the march due to the disregard of instructions on matters of discipline. 25. In addition, the march was accompanied for most of the way by a World in Action reporting crew, which caused the march stewards to enforce council policy on discipline even more strictly. And if we could go to para 26, please. The organisers were of the opinion that the huge wave of support that the campaign was riding on would disintegrate if the media reported any incidents of violence or rowdyism, and there can be little doubt that during the initial stages of the march, these feelings were of paramount importance in curtailing any serious public order. And then if we could go to page 6, paragraph 30. On entering London, Southall, the mood of the march altered, becoming far more militant. This can be accounted for by the fact that the marchers were faced with larger numbers of police than they had previously experienced, plus the moral support of freshly turned out members of the SWP. This sudden turn of events led to the arrest of 7 marchers following a fracas with a member of the public. And then if we could go to paragraphs 35 and 36 on the next page. It is estimated that about 8,000 demonstrators were present outside the conference centre, and there can be little doubt that had it not been for the presence of large numbers of police on duty outside, serious public disorder would have ensued relating in damage to property and physical assaults on conference delegates. The march organisers, having witnessed the strength of the police, were visibly crestfallen and had no other option but to advise those intent on charging the police lines and undertaking other forms of direct confrontation with both police and delegates to curb their actions. Apart from isolated minor scuffles and verbal abuse, this proved to be the case, and only 16 arrests were made. So the picture is of a march which passed off essentially uneventfully until it got to London, a fracas in Southall with 7 arrests, a huge demonstration in Brighton with a large police presence, some arrests, but the police view was it could have been much, much worse. What I'd like to explore with you is to what extent do you think SDS intelligence contributed to that outcome?
It seems fairly plain, sir, with respect. The SDS predicted that the march from Wales would attract little disorder, leaving aside possible rowdyism and drunkenness from the marchers, which proved to be the case, it appears. 5 were thrown off the march. It then said that, this is the SDS report, that fresh faces would join the march when it got to London, which actually did happen. The disorder at Slough, I think, was it? Southall. The disorder at Southall involved a fracas with a member of the public, not with the police. And then the report correctly said that there would be disorder in Brighton, which there would have been without an enormous number of police.
Now, what I'm driving at is, if the SDS intelligence hadn't been available, wouldn't it have been predictable anyway that the march would probably pass off peacefully and the trouble would be at Brighton?
Yes, but if you've got an organisation like the SDS, why would you employ guesswork? Thinking of the expenses of police deployments, you've got the SDS, why wouldn't you use them?
I think I'm driving at, did you really need the SDS?
You had the SDS already. I mean, I don't think that question is answerable looking at the length of the entire history of the SDS.
I'm asking because, as you know, one of your officers was on that march, infiltrated that march, and was it necessary to have an SDS officer on that march?
He may have had to go on the march to maintain his cover.
Was it necessary for public order policing purposes?
Well, I still say yes, sir. I mean, I take your point that you perhaps could have guessed what might happen, but isn't it more useful? It is more useful to have something fairly concrete to tell you what's likely to happen.
Can we take that down, please, and move on to a different topic and a different document? It's UCPI 50/14208. Now, this is a report about a meeting which took place on the 14th of August 1980. Paragraph 2 reads, on Thursday, the 14th of August 1980, at Mornington Hall, the Green, Chingford, E4, the Waltham Forest District of the Socialist Workers' Party held a meeting to voice their opposition to the National Front and, in particular, its growth within the Chingford area. Then it goes on to describe a leafleting effort. And if we move to paragraph 4, Privacy Waltham Forest District organiser had called for and almost achieved a full turnout of members on Saturday the 9th of August at Station Road, Chingford, for a mass leafleting in order to publicise this meeting. In addition, the exercise was organised with a view to confronting the National Front in a show of strength on its doorstep. And at paragraph 5, due to the non-attendance of local inhabitants, the meeting was confined to planning a future campaign aimed at stamping out the National Front in Chingford. This will take the form of increased confrontation with NF supporters in the area, leafleting and a promotion of anti-Nazi racist propaganda within the breeding grounds of National Front recruitment, namely local schools. First question, as far as you're aware, would this have been a specific commission or just part and parcel of the hoovering up approach?
Part and parcel. I'm not sure I call that hoovering up, sir, because it's quite specific public order material, but it would not have been tasked, I guess. It would have been picked up.
And what was the public order policing value in a meeting of people who want to take action against local fascists?
Because it tells you how they're likely to take this forward.
Do you think that the use of the term propaganda for material which is anti-Nazi and anti-fascist in nature was an appropriate term?
No, perhaps not. Again, by modern eyes. I must say I wouldn't have thought twice of it then, but now it's probably inappropriate.
Okay, can we take that down, please? Can we move on to the subject of relationships? You explained in your witness statement that you did block the recruitment to the SDS when you were a superintendent in 1981 of an officer because he had been unfaithful to his partner in the office.
Yes, sir.
And your concern was that if he would do that in the office, he might do that when he was deployed undercover.
I hadn't thought it through in as much detail as that, but I just felt that behaviour didn't indicate that he was suitable for the SDS at that time.
Well, if you had addressed your mind to it, it must have been obvious that he might do the same thing
Yes.
undercover.
Yes, sir.
And that would have been a concern of yours,
Yes.
would it?
Yes, it would.
And was that or wasn't it one of the reasons you stopped that person becoming an SDS officer.
Yes.
If we may look at some more general factors as well, your officers were either all or mostly married, weren't they?
Yes, sir.
Was one of the reasons that married officers were recruited to reduce the risk of them involving themselves sexually?
That was one of the reasons, not the only one.
Although they were in fact married, they were pretending to be single, weren't
Yes,
they?
sir.
Wasn't there a risk arising from the fact they were pretending to be single of sexual activity occurring?
Obviously there was a risk, as we know with hindsight, sir, but I suppose we didn't see it like that at the time.
Well, did you address your mind to that at all at the time?
No, I just thought that to do something like that would be so silly that they wouldn't contemplate doing it.
It was a very stressful job to go undercover, wasn't it?
I imagine so, yes, sir.
On the whole, the people that they were infiltrating were no friends of the police.
Correct.
And whatever might actually have happened if they'd been uncovered, presumably you were aware your officers would fear the worst should they be uncovered as police officers.
As did I. That was one of the things that did exercise my mind.
Keep you awake at night.
Not quite that far, sir, but
Wouldn't it be a natural reaction of an undercover officer pretending to be a single man to think, if I form a relationship, that might enhance my cover and keep me safer?
I would have thought the more natural reaction would be to, if I start a relationship, it's going to potentially cause me more trouble, to be quite honest.
Do you think that there was a risk that an officer might have thought that if they form a relationship, it might enhance their access to information, if it was the right relationship?
No, I don't think that. I think, if anything, your former comment is the more likely, which is that it would enhance their cover. But I don't really go along with that either.
Did you consider either of those risks when you were the head of the SDS?
No, I didn't, because I come back to my answer of a couple of minutes ago. I thought it was such a stupid thing to do that they wouldn't contemplate doing it.
And I think you're clear in your witness statement that you gave your officers no advice at all on this subject.
I didn't, sir, no.
Can we consider first the officer we know as HN21? There should be a key now. He's an anonymous officer, so it's very important
yes.
we don't use his name.
I know who you're talking about, sir.
You were meeting your officers at least twice a week, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
And you were very concerned about their welfare
Yes, sir.
and their cover,
Yes, sir.
and no doubt their work as well.
Yes, sir.
And you were talking to them about all of those things?
Yes, everything. Anything they wanted to talk about and that we wanted to talk about.
And did you talk to them at the level of detail about the personalities within their groups?
No, it would. The conversations with them were more pertaining to their welfare, because any information about personalities within their groups would come through on paper, if appropriate.
But surely they'd talk to you about at least the more prominent or remarkable figures in their groups.
Not really. So no, it was probably when we did used to meet them, it was more a chance for them to talk to someone who was both, perhaps I wouldn't say a friend, that's probably going too far, but a colleague and a supervisor in their real identity, and to sort of relax for a bit, be that at the safe house in a group environment, or be that in a pub on a one-to-one basis.
Did HN21 tell you that he'd had sex with a woman?
No, sir.
Did he say anything to you that might have suggested he was becoming close to a woman?
No, sir.
We now know that he did have sex twice with a woman. Do you think, looking back, that if you had spoken to him more, you might have conveyed to him what you felt in your own mind, namely it would be very stupid to do something like that?
No, sir. I mean, I suppose to put it how I saw it, I'd read the statements of this individual, and I'd picked up on exactly what you've just told me, but I could not, from my own mind, identify him until I saw it in the reference book here. So I had absolutely no idea, in fact, even until today, that individual, I knew HN21 was, but I didn't realise that individual was, if that makes it clear. In fact, I'm quite surprised.
Do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, that some proactive discussion about the risks and about the wrongness of sexual activity with people undercover might have reduced the chances of officers behaving in the way they did?
Clearly, with hindsight, yes.
Can I ask you now about the officer we know as HN106? Did you get any inkling from him that he was gaining a reputation within his group as somebody with a girlfriend?
No, sir.
Did you get any inkling that he was getting close to any female he was mixing with as an undercover officer?
No, sir.
The same questions that I asked you about conversations about this sort of thing and whether, in hindsight, more might have reduced the risk of an officer succumbing to temptation, would that apply to every officer under your command? Can I move to HN 126? Did you get any inkling in any of your conversations with him that he was getting close to a female?
No, not in his group. I mean, his marriage was on the rocks. And
we'll come back to that later.
Okay, but no, not in terms of
in his group.
No.
And any inkling that did he say anything to the effect of it had any sexual activity?
No.
HN 155. First of all, starting with his character, how would you describe him?
A larger-than-life character. Quite outgoing. Perhaps a bit more difficult to manage than some of the others.
If it surprises you to learn that HN21 did have sex with an activist, does it surprise you that HN 155's risk assessors have told us that he 155 confessed to such activity?
Perhaps less so.
Did he say anything to you about either actual or imminent sexual activity?
No, sir.
You've already told me that you won't have discussed in any detail the risks with him, but is he the sort of character where it might have been particularly helpful to put a shot across his bows?
With hindsight, yes.
HN 297. We have some evidence from 1976 that he told his fellow undercover officers that one of the reasons for his compromise is that he got involved sexually with 2 women. Did you ever hear anything about that, any whiff of that, anything at all?
About 297?
Yeah.
No, I did know him from a different environment, shall we say, within Special Branch, but no, I had no knowledge of him in the SDS, nor did I hear any rumours about it.
HN 300, back to where we started this morning. The evidence we've received is that not only did he meet an activist, but he married her. Did you hear anything about that?
No, again, it was outside of my time, but I did know him from elsewhere in Special Branch. And
sorry, carry on.
well, I wouldn't say that I didn't know about the marriage, but perhaps the relationship doesn't surprise me, put it that way. I didn't actually realise he was there from the SDS, I have to say.
You've already explained that you might have had more concerns about HN 155 than HN 21. Were there any other officers that you supervised who you might have thought were more at risk of misconduct of this nature?
No, I actually thought as a general statement they were all pretty steady and reliable.
Were any of them regarded as womanizers?
No.
If any of the officers who we know had sexual contact, or if it's true, those against whom it is alleged, had told you, how much importance would you have attached to that at the time?
Quite a lot. It would have involved quite a serious conversation, I have to say. I would like to say I would have done this, that and the other, but the short answer is I don't quite know how I would have dealt with it. It would certainly have led to a reconsideration of their position in the SDS. Not making any moral judgments whether they were married or not, just that it was stupid behaviour. And I would have had to make a judgment, and probably referred it up the management chain as well, as to whether that person should continue on the SDS or not.
The evidence that we've had thus far indicates that HN 300 went at least as far as admitting he was falling in love with an activist, and that he was removed from the SDS. Another officer has told us he thought if he'd admitted to what he'd done, he would have been given words of guidance. As someone who himself managed the SDS, what is your reaction to what was done in HN 300's case, and what the officer in the other case thought would have happened had he confessed?
Sorry, so I was looking at the folder then,
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question? I do apologise.
HN 300
Yes.
removed from the SDS.
I did a double take, so I thought it was someone else. I do apologise.
When he admitted he was falling in love with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
What's your view of that as a measure?
What, removing from the SDS?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought that was inevitable. I don't like to speak ill of the dead. I'm not sure I'd have had HN 300 on the SDS had I been selecting people at that time.
A fear that a confession might lead to words of guidance. How realistic do you think that was as to the reaction that SDS management would have to a confession of sexual activity with a member of the public in their undercover identity?
I would have thought words of guidance would be the minimum.
In truth, this is serious misconduct,
Yes,
isn't it?
Yes.
Did you ever get the sense that the operational security of the SDS was such that it would inhibit disciplinary action being taken in such circumstances?
Not in my time. When you say disciplinary action, I don't think it would necessarily have led to a formal police disciplinary conduct in terms of appearing before a disciplinary board. It would have certainly, I would think, have led to a redeployment of the individual and maybe a re-examination of his position in special branch. Not sure about that. All SB officers were vetted, the government vetting system. And of course, something like that could put your vetting clearance in jeopardy. And if you're not vetted, you don't stay in special branch.
Next question I want a yes/no answer to, please. Did you give any thought to the provision of cover girlfriends?
No.
Did you give any other advice as to how to avoid sexual contact? For example, imaginary girlfriends or being Mr. Grumpy?
Would have been quite a good idea, but no, I didn't, sir.
So would that be a good moment to have our afternoon break?
Certainly. 10 minutes or 15?
I think we can afford 15, so.
Okay. 15 minutes. We'll resume shortly before 20 past.
All rise, please.
Mr. Moss, just two more things about relationships. First, I'd like to clear something up. You used the word stupid about the conduct of officers who did get involved in sexual activity with people in their undercover identities. I'm not understanding you to be saying, by using that word, that you're putting all of the blame on the officers, are you?
No, sir, I'm not quite sure where you're going with this, but...
Well, where I'm going is, as we discussed, they are sent in without any guidance.
Understood.
And they're sent
No,
into an
fair
environment
comment.
as young men pretending to be single in environments which can be sexually pretty active.
Yes, sir.
So you wouldn't wish to leave here giving the impression that you're putting all of the blame on them.
No, sir.
Thank you. And the second thing is, whilst you were having your meetings at the safe flats and in any socialising afterwards, did you ever hear any banter of the kind which might have suggested that there was sexual activity going on?
No, sir.
One of the officers who gave evidence in phase 2 said that there was such banter. He was an officer who I think finished just before you, in fairness to you, but are you sure that there wasn't any banter about that sort of thing, or any gossip, or even any mention of it?
Yes, I am.
Can I move now to assumptions of positions of responsibility? You've explained in your witness statement that no prior permission was required by an undercover officer on your watch to take a position of responsibility. You thought it had advantages. You thought that it did require fine judgment, though, and you thought that something like a treasurer or membership secretary would be the best. Have I fairly summarised those views?
That's correct, sir.
Did you give your officers any guidance in this matter?
As I recall a couple of conversations where, informally, usually at the safe house meetings, I was told that someone was up for or had been invited to take up a certain job, and I would have said, that's a good thing, go for it, or that's a bit too much, but apart from that, no.
And this is a sort of conversation that would have arisen in the safe house, is it?
Yes, yes.
Did you ever explore with them whether they were influencing the course of the groups they were infiltrating?
Well, if I was given advance warning of it, as I've just described, yes, then I would have asked what the position involved, and made it clear that it should be, if you like, sufficiently senior to be useful to us, but not sufficiently senior to be directing operations, so to speak.
And once one of your officers had assumed a position, did you talk to them about what they were doing in that position?
Yes, but often it would come from them, again, at the safe house meetings, where you just informally talk and said, oh, I've done this, so I'm going to do that, I might better get that for us, that sort of conversation.
Your view that it required fine judgment, how did you ensure that fine judgments were exercised?
By conversations with them, either, as I've just described, on the occasions when they said that they may be up for this job, or once I knew they were in that job, talking about what they were doing, how far they should let it go, and, yes, how far they should let it go.
Can I ask you about a specific example, HN 155? he gets into the Socialist Workers' Party's headquarters, and he reports a lot of organisational data from the headquarters office, membership lists, that sort of thing. And we touched upon that earlier. Did you consider that was a good thing?
I'm sure the security service would have considered it a good thing. I thought as long as he was fulfilling our function, then I was quite happy for him to be performing that function as well. As long, I mean, he was able to take part in things organised by the SWP, but I didn't want him organising things. That would have been my
He had inveigled his way into the headquarters by deception, hadn't he?
Yes.
And he was taking property from the building, wasn't he? Or certainly taking confidential information.
He was taking confidential information, yes.
Did it cross your mind that that might amount to a criminal offence?
He wasn't actually taking anything material, as I recall. It was copying stuff down, and if you're thinking of data protection breaches, I'm not sure the data protection rules were in place then.
So you had no concerns?
No.
They weren't, even for interrupting, the Data Protection Act was clearly not in force then, and I think it may be to mischaracterise taking confidential information for a purpose for which it was not intended and without the permission of the owner is not a crime but a civil wrong.
I would accept that, sir, but I didn't think about it when I was presented with it.
Thank you. Can I move now to welfare? And you've explained that was something high on your agenda. You tell us that you visited HN19's wife at the recruitment stage.
Ah, yes.
And could you explain in your own words the purpose of that?
To ensure that she was aware of what her husband was letting himself in for, what that would mean for her in terms of domestic bliss and times away from home, and that she didn't have any, I suppose, moral problems with it, although, of course, I couldn't really explain to her really what it involved, so that was not so much, it was a concern, but not something I could really discuss with her. It was really a welfare.
What moral problems did you think there might be?
Well, if, for example, the very thing you've just raised was if her husband was going to be doing things like that, spying on people, that she might have a big problem with that. But I wasn't really able to discuss that because it would have breached the confidentiality. She knew he was working undercover and infiltrating groups. I suppose she could have worked it out for herself. It was more welfare, sir.
Would it be fair to say that the SDS asked a lot of the wives of the officers it deployed?
Yes, it would. More than I realised at the time. And
you regarded their marriage status as an anchor that would secure them?
Yes, and I touched on this in answer to your previous question, not so much in it was part of it in a sexual way, but so they had someone that they could trust, they could let steam off to.
In a wider sense as well?
In a wider sense of the word, yes.
There were Christmas lunches in 1980 and 81.
Yes, sir.
And how well attended were they?
100%, as I recall.
And senior officers present?
I think the first one, it's something that that later down the line seems to have fallen into disuse, but I thought it was a good thing. And I think, as I recall, that the first one I went to, all the UCOs were there, together with their wives, and the back office staff with their wives, myself and my wife. I'm not sure anyone more senior was there, but at the one after that, then the DAC came to it with his wife. and all the UCOs and their wives.
You say in addition that you occasionally had a drink with wives and their husbands to provide reassurance that their husbands were doing an important job.
If requested, never at our request, because that would have probably been a bit intrusive. But once or twice a UCO would, for example, ask to meet us for a drink and a chat and bring his wife along.
Is that once or twice in the 11 months?
Once or twice. It was quite rare.
Now, there was an incident, wasn't there, when HN 126 was going through his divorce.
Yes, sir.
Could we look at tab 14, MPS-0726912? Yep, 072, it's MPS-0726912. Is that the right reference? Thank you very much. Could we go to paragraph 3, please? Sorry, page 3. This is the minute sheet for the document concerned, which deals with the incident that you had to deal with. Reads, we have already discussed this matter. As stated in DCI Moss's report, it seems probable that HN 126's wife wrote the letter, and it is to be hoped that our visit will have acted as a deterrent to any repetition of the act. In the circumstances, I feel that nothing further should be done unless another communication is received. So this is evidence that your boss has essentially accepted the advice that you gave them about how to deal with the incident.
Yes, sir.
And the incident had been the receipt of an anonymous letter, hadn't it?
Yes, sir.
If we go to page 9, that is the letter. Dear Sir David, is that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner at the time?
Yes.
Could you please look into why your supposed undercover special branch officers undertake pastime openly, have affairs with members of the opposite sex who are also in the force, and in some instances actually live in police accommodation together? Nice bit of undercover work. No wonder the police are coming in for criticism. Sorry that this is anonymous, but I can assure you that the facts are correct. So what about some action before the likes of the National Front, who you are supposedly infiltrating for one, or the press find out? Yours in hope of justice, an ex-friend of a Hairy. And it was your conclusion that this came from HN 126's wife?
Yes, sir.
Now, at the time, it says police are coming in for increasing criticism. Do you know what that is a reference to?
I don't actually, so no.
The second paragraph, did you take that as a threat?
Yes, I did.
That she, whoever the author was, might go to the National Front or the press?
Yes, sir.
And if we go to page 6 of this file, please. And this is your report, isn't it? If we go to paragraph 9, please. Thank you. It says, such evidence as there is therefore points to HN 126's wife as the writer of the letter. She has committed no offence in sending it, and there seems little point in pursuing the matter. Part of the object of the visit to her was to let her see that the letter had arrived at its destination and that some action was being taken about it. It is hoped that this object has been achieved, and she will have been persuaded not to write any more letters to the Commissioner, or perhaps more important, to any more public source which might cause the Commissioner serious embarrassment. What was the embarrassment that you were referring to?
Well, the existence of the SDS.
And why would that have been embarrassing?
Because from the beginning, we had been instructed by Home Office that the SDS was to be a top secret organisation. And I can't say that we were acting on the fringes of the law because there was no law governing what we were doing, which was a problem. But I have no doubt whatsoever, and this inquiry is evidence of that, that there would have been a public outcry, maybe not, but I think there probably would have been a public outcry had the existence of the SDS become known at that stage.
And why would there have been an outcry?
Well, there was when Peter Francis went to The Guardian, I suppose, and what I'm saying is that could have preempted what happened then.
Now, there may be a tension between the way you dealt with the applicant for the SDS, who had had an affair at work, who you did not let join the SDS, and HN 126, who it appears had also had an affair at work. He remained with the SDS, didn't he, after this episode?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain the difference in treatment?
I haven't referred to it in the report, so I can't correctly remember the circumstances. I've got a feeling that the marriage had irretrievably broken down, so there was no question of well, legally it was infidelity, but if you like, mentally there wasn't. He was living in police married quarters with the third party, who was another police officer, I think. So it was all above board. She knew about, obviously she knew about it. He was doing a good job in the field that he was in, and there seemed little point in taking him out in those circumstances. And I assume that the fact he was living in married quarters with her meant that the organisation knew about the relationship. That's what I'm not sure about from my report. The organisation knew about the relationship.
In 126's case, it does say the Commissioner had been fully appraised of events.
I mean, before this letter came, that he'd been given permission to live in married quarters with the third party. So it didn't seem as bad as it wasn't deceitful at all in that his wife knew about it. And that was the difference.
Did you think there was any risk that 126 might himself get involved in sexual activity with activists?
Well, no, I didn't, because he'd already got involved in sexual activity with a colleague. So I thought that probably a fresh relationship would keep him on the straight and narrow. I didn't actually give it much thought, in truth.
HN 155. Now, you say that you visited his wife because of concerns that he, 155, wasn't treating her well. What was the SDS's concern about this?
I'm sure that a future witness will be able to correct me on this, but I've got a feeling that she and Trevor Butler and his wife were friends outside of the job, so to speak, and she had spoken perhaps informally to Trevor Butler about this, and that caused us to go and see her officially, as it were, rather than just sort of talking over the kitchen table to Trevor and his wife. to reassure her of our support and that we would do anything she needed in the way of support officially.
And was your concern about her welfare or the operational security of the SDS?
In that case, her welfare.
And the operational security of the SDS, or just
No,
her welfare?
Just her welfare.
You obviously did have some contact with the wives, as you have described. Looking back, with hindsight, do you think that the SDS could have done more to support the wives of those who were deployed undercover for years on end?
Yes, I think that probably, reading other people's evidence, it's clear that in some cases the wives weren't spoken to before deployment. That was probably an oversight, or plain wrong. And maybe, again, with hindsight, we should have put some arrangement in place to perhaps make regular contacts with the wives, if only on the telephone, to make sure everything was in order, which we didn't. Other than the incident which I've described elsewhere, where one of the wives had a serious domestic accident, and we looked after her husband in that way and arranged his duties so that he could spend time with her. We may have sent her some flowers or contacted her or something as a result of that domestic accident.
Thank you. Can we go now to your chain of command? You've described that Superintendent David Palmer Hall had a light touch and was reactive and welfare orientated. How often would you speak to him?
Daily. If in fact I took his place when he retired, he was one floor up. He was obviously he was very interested in what was going on and wanted to be informed.
And would he have known which fields the SDS officers were deployed into?
No, probably not.
Would he have known about salient events within the unit's life?
Yes, if it was something that I felt he needed to know about, I would have informed him.
And did he feed down to you any requests for intelligence, or did they come through a different route?
They would have come through a different route.
And did he feed down any other feedback about the SDS?
Not that I can remember. He was always interested in welfare and things like that, as I've touched on. He's a very gentlemanly sort of character and wanted to make sure that people were being looked after.
Chief Superintendent, you've described as having limited involvement, the occasional supervisory visit. What would a supervisory visit entail?
Usually a visit to one or other of the safe houses on one of the weekly meetings, to just meet them, have a chat with them, say well done, that sort of thing.
So is this to be distinguished from a visit from the top brass?
Yes,
in the sense that this was not a timetable, staged, prepared for event.
Correct.
It was sitting in on
Yes.
on an ordinary
meeting,
safe
yes.
house meeting.
I mean, Ray Wilson, who was my boss to start with, would have taken a slightly different view to Jeff Craft when he became my boss, because Jeff had been in my position, so he knew more. He would probably have taken more of an interest than Ray did.
You've described the commander as being rarely involved,
Yes.
but would have known not only of the existence of the SDS, but broadly speaking, what it was doing.
Oh, absolutely. He would have probably signed off the annual report, or at least certainly checked it through before it went to the DAC, whoever sent it off to Home Office. And the main times I would see him would be when we were sending someone outside the Met Police District. Used to have to get permission to do that. So I would usually, instead of putting the paperwork through the correspondence system, I would usually take the file actually up to him, plonk it on his desk, which gave him the opportunity to ask what was going on and make any comment that he wished to make.
I see. And were those questions about both welfare and operational matters?
What, from the commander?
Yeah.
Probably both, because he would talk to me about the particular visit that I was proposing, and so he'd want to know that the individual was going to be properly looked after and that the visit was necessary. And he might, I suppose, throw in and comment and ask how things are going generally, but a general comment that you might make if you see someone.
Now, you moved to Vincent Square during your tenure, didn't you?
Yes,
The chain of command formally remained the same.
absolutely.
But instead of being in the same building in close proximity, you were a 15-minute walk away.
Yes.
Did that inevitably mean that the frequency of contact diminished?
I suppose it meant that you had to make an effort if you wanted to talk face-to-face with someone, but as I said, it was only 15 minutes away.
Could we look at what the annual report has to say about this? It's at tab 22. It's MPS-0728-962. And when we get that up, if you could have page 5, please. Thank you. Just a moment. If we could have paragraph 7, please. Due to the pressure on space at Commissioner's office, the SDS administration was moved in November to Vincent Square. This arrangement has proved generally satisfactory and, in terms of security, positively advantageous. Although as a result of the move, the SDS has become a little remote from the rest of Special Branch, contact is maintained through frequent visits to Commissioner's office by members of the office staff and the continued presence in that building of the Chief Superintendent and Superintendent, who are in overall charge of the squad. This is the report for your year. You would, of course, have approved this report. The words "a little remote," those do suggest that it might have had some impact on the level of supervision.
I don't think so, sir. I think they were just making the point in terms of distance. I mean, coincidentally, of course, I got promoted a month or a couple of months after the move. So having been in the office in Vincent Square, I then went back to the office at the Yard. So I knew what was going on there. So it didn't really make a lot of difference. And it was more secure. If you imagine, we were going out from Scotland Yard car park in our undercover cars out to meet the staff, and had anyone been trying to track us, it would perhaps been easier from Scotland Yard than from Vincent Square.
I can quite see there were security reasons to do it, but what I'm interested in, you being the person who was in post when it starts to happen, whether you detected, if only the slight beginnings of it, the potential of a unit to drift away from under the wing of the rest of Special Branch and to become, in the fullness of time, quite isolated.
No, I don't think so, sir, because in addition to the SDS, the surveillance team was housed over there as well, which is also part of Special Branch. So we actually moved into and that was part of S Squad as well. So no, I don't. I mean, you could actually see Scotland Yard from that building. It was that close. So I don't see it as a problem at all.
Can I now ask you a little bit more about an overview of your year's tenure or thereabouts? Are you able to help with the quantity and quality of reporting that emanated from the SDS, both in terms of, in comparison to the whole Special Branch effort, and in terms of the impact it might have had?
Well, taking the quantity first, without access to contemporaneous records, I couldn't tell you that would have been available. We certainly kept a record of quantity. In terms of quality, I don't recall any complaints. I don't recall any particular plaudits from within the MPS either, but I don't recall any complaints. It was a busy year, as I illustrated at the beginning of my evidence. Looking at the Commission's annual report for that year, I would guess that the SDS was providing intelligence on at least 5 demonstrations a week, plus an unspecified number of industrial disputes where there was a police presence at the picket line, maybe none. I don't know at all on that. So it was 5 reports a week. There was no complaints about quality that I'm aware of, and no particular plaudits either that I can remember. And in terms of the overall impact, I think that it was a busy year for Special Branch as a whole. I mean, Special Branch didn't just deal with demonstrations. As you're aware, it had many other strings to its bow. It would have been seen as a busy year. I think the SDS would have been seen as pulling its weight. I can't really be any more specific than that.
I mean, the 2 things that really stand out from the annual report are, as we looked at earlier, the violence between the far left and the far right, and the return to work march are the 2 things that
yes, I mean, the
prominence.
left and right demos, as I recall, the big ones, there were 9 or 10 of those in that year, all requiring very, very hefty policing. And I would imagine if the SDS had done anything wrong there or got anything wrong, then that would have been the cause of complaint. But it was a busy year.
Did having been an undercover officer yourself affect the way in which you managed the SDS?
Well, my deployment was relatively short. As I said, when the SDS was formed, the intention was to just keep it up until the next demonstration. But for reasons above my pay grade, it was kept on. It was, I think I've used the word in the past, it was quite an amateur operation when I first joined it. But I do feel at least I had an understanding of the pressures that they were under, albeit for a relatively short time. So I think it gave me more empathy towards the field officers than might otherwise have been the case. Clearly, Mike Ferguson probably had even more empathy than me because he'd been a well-embedded field officer in his time. So I think that's how it affected my outlook on them.
Were you ever involved in preparing material or briefings for the Home Office about the SDS?
No, other than the annual report.
Yep. Moving on to your time, I'm just going to touch on this very briefly, as a superintendent in S Squad. You were on the other side of that managerial relationship. How did you manage that? Could you give us an idea of the nature and frequency of contact that you had?
Well, it decreased because in that role I had, with the Chief Superintendent, other parts of S Squad to supervise. I probably paid more attention to the SDS than I would otherwise have done because I probably still expected to be a Chief Inspector down there for that year, and the promotion surprised me as it probably surprised my colleagues. And another issue was that during 1982, as well as everything else that went on, we had the papal visit, and Geoffrey Kraft was the protection officer for the Pope, so he was actually missing for a couple of months or so for the preparation and the actual visit. So I was sort of by myself in the office then. So that was how the year went. I'm not sure, again, I've answered your question.
Did you make requests of your successor for specific intelligence?
Not specific. Because Trevor Butler got promoted to Chief Inspector on the same day, I think, as I got promoted Superintendent. As I said, I showed more interest in it than probably my predecessor had, only because I knew what was going on and who was who and so on and so forth. But no, I had to leave it to him to get on with things, as much as the way I'd expected to be left to get on with things myself.
The Brixton riots happened in 1981. Are you able, from the position you held in S Squad, to say anything about public order policing, not from the riots themselves, but in the aftermath, and in particular whether the SDS made any contribution to that?
I've got a feeling that they didn't, and my recollection is that we did look at that to say, were the SDS able to make any contribution? And I think the only thing that they might have done, and this could be inaccurate, would be to be shown some photographs to see if they could identify any of the rioters as people that had come within their purview.
There was an officer who was deployed into the SWP in southeast London, I think from recollection HN 356, who was moved to Brixton when the SWP established a branch there. Can you recall that?
I knew him. Yeah, he was one of my officers when I was Chief Inspector. I don't think I was aware that he was moved over there.
Vetting. I mean vetting, not blacklisting. The 1979 Special Branch Annual Report includes some statistics under the heading vetting. It says reports on information obtained by individuals, 2,886, and inquiries for Box 500. In fact, I think we better call this up. Could we have MPS-0727-595, just to make sure the note I've made is correct. Page 27, please. You can see those statistics. Reports on information obtained by individual officers, 8,025, forgive me. And then you'll see the other statistics in front of you. The inquiries for Box 500, 2,846. Can you, first of all, explain what Special Branch did in relation to vetting? Was it vetting people itself?
You know, actually, I don't really know what some of these things are. We had a vetting office which was tiny and I think had 2 or maybe 3 tops members of staff. They used to start the ball rolling with applications for vetting and do some of the initial searches for police staff. So that would answer some of those things. I assume the inquiries for Box 500 were just requests for searches in Special Branch records by the security service doing their own vetting. I'm assuming that the inquiries on applicants for police forces and civil staff were similarly applications for searches in Special Branch records for vetting. But of course they should only duplicate what's in the security service records. So I'm not actually sure what some of those things are, I'm afraid.
Well, if you can't answer this next question, just say so. Do you know whether any of the reports on information obtained by individual officers would have come from the SDS?
I don't even know what that means, I'm afraid.
And under the inquiries for Box 500, let us assume that you are correct, that this is requests for searches of Special Branch records. Would it follow that it's at least possible that some of the records that would have been looked up would have come from the SDS because SDS intelligence reports ended up on Special Branch files?
Yes, absolutely.
A very specific question about Mike Ferguson, and if I can have a specific answer, please. Do you know whether Mike Ferguson assumed a position of responsibility within the anti-apartheid movement when he was an undercover police officer?
I have no idea.
A follow-up question from something you said right at the start of your evidence about the practice of using deceased children's identities. Do you know how it came about that the SDS started to use that practice?
No, all I can say, as I said at that time, is that I left in October 68 and we weren't doing that, none of us. I came back, as is a matter of record, in January 80, and then it was a widespread practice. And I think almost, I don't think all of them, but nearly all of my officers had used dead children's identities. Where it happened along the path, I don't know, I'm afraid.
Thank you. You mentioned getting some training from the security service when we were discussing subversion. Was that training about subversion?
No, the security service ran, they had a training wing.
I think if it wasn't about subversion, we don't need to go any further unless
it
was relevant to your SDS work, in which case, please, could you tell us?
It was a course really about the work of the security service, and that included some discussion on subversion.
If we could have up, please, UCPI 5034702. I was reminded during the break that we've got some evidence that the special branch training course, at least for the year we've got the syllabus, which was 1979, involved some of the course being taught may have been of relevance to the security service. Could we have a look at page 4, first of all, please? And there's, at the bottom of that page, a Box 500 speaker referred to about right-wing extremism. Can you recall whether when you joined Special Branch you were given any training by security service speakers?
I don't think so. It was more on job training. I was actually responsible for these courses in a later incarnation. And if you like, these were run in parallel with the security service courses that I referred to a minute or so ago. And these were 2-week courses run and managed by Met Police Special Branch, which was seen as the senior special branch, if I can perhaps incorrectly call it that, the largest special branch, with some national responsibilities. And we would run these courses in conjunction with the security service, and they would provide lecturers for a number of topics. But I don't think I went to one of these myself.
Thank you. You've been very patient, Mr. Moss. I'm very grateful for your assistance. We've now reached the point where there'll be a short break, and we'll see whether anyone wants to encourage me to reprise my role.
Are we going on this occasion to take the usual 20 minutes to permit those who've been hearing our evidence, but with a 10-minute delay, to intervene if they wish?
We are, sir,
yes.
Although one of the great advantages of being in person is that I think quite a lot of what would otherwise have been raised now was raised with me at the break.
Yes. Then we will break then until 25 past and then resume. And not that long after that, I think your ordeal in the witness box will come to an end.
Thank you, sir.
All rise, please.
Mr. Moss, not very much, just a few questions. First of all, you gave some evidence about how you helped to exercise a fine judgment with the assumption of positions of responsibility, and said that you would say yes or no if a position was proposed. Can you think of any position you said no to?
No, I can't, sir.
The A8 threat assessments for A8. Would the threat assessment be disseminated to anybody else other than the A8?
Yeah, I think it's a question for them really, but answering it to the best of my ability. It was written deliberately in a bland way. It was probably either unclassified or sort of confidential or even restricted. It was on a special form and it had threat assessment at the top. And I believe it was deliberately written so it could be given further down the command chain if it was needed. Not sure about that, but that's my belief.
A7, can you help us with who A7 is?
A7 was Community Relations Branch.
Going back to the 1971 document I showed you almost at the beginning of your evidence, and the number, the S number.
Oh, yes.
And you said that you thought that there was a series of numbers for
Yes.
all the special branch reports. Is there any way of telling which bit of special branch can be related to which number?
Yes. The makeup of Special Branch was, it had lettered squads. A squad dealt with protection, so nothing to do with SDS whatsoever. That was of Ministers of State, not royalty, all protection other than royalty. B squad was the Irish.
I wasn't so much asking you which squad did what. I was asking you on the number. If you had the S number,
Yeah.
could you tell from the number which part of Special Branch that report had
No,
come
the
from?
S would give you the part of. I know you said to me that S squad didn't exist
Yeah.
then, so I'm a bit confused at that. But
You think there might have been an A and a B?
well, there wouldn't have been an A ever because they did, but there would have been a B, and a C. Yes.
And to the
and,
best,
and an E.
to the best of your knowledge, would there be any way of telling whether it had come from the SDS from that number?
Well, I'm just wondering if you tell me that there was no S squad, because I do remember that it was created after some of the other squads, hence no alphabetical sequence. I'm just wondering if that was an SDS number. SDS kept its own records, which are probably long gone, I'm guessing. So it could be that, if you told me S squad didn't exist at that time.
Do you know whether there was any key kept, as in a key to that type of filing number?
No, it's as I described it. There was, bear in mind, it was pre-computerization. There was a big sort of A4 book with numbers sort of stamped down the side. And if you were on B squad, shall we say, you would go and take numbers 1 to 200 from the main book. You'd put them in the B squad folder, and as a report was written, that would be given a B squad number, and that would be transferred to the main book, which would give you, so that was the only central record, and that would give you an overall number of reports that had been written in the course of a year, and the guide would just be that prefix letter.
I see. So nobody took a record of which numbers had been taken by which
Yes,
branch?
yes. The book, as I recall, and this is going way, way back now, was kept in the admin office, and I'm guessing that there would be a sort of pencil annotation saying, you know, numbers 1 to 200 B squad. Then it would be filled in ink as those 200 reports were submitted by B squad.
Okay, thank you.
It was very bit clunky, but that's all we had in those days.
HN 155.
Oh, yes.
You visited his wife because there was a concern that he wasn't treating her well. Did that involve domestic abuse?
Might have.
Did it involve violence?
I'm not sure whether it went that far. I really can't remember. Possibly.
Did that give you any concerns about his suitability to be an SDS officer?
Again, at this length of time, I can't remember. It probably should have done if it was physical. I really can't remember whether it was physical or mental, if I can use that word. He was a larger-than-life character. I assume that Trevor Butler and I would have discussed it. We didn't raise it any further up the management chain. So I can only assume that if we would have discussed it and we decided that it was okay for him to carry on. I can't be any more specific than that, I'm afraid.
You'll be very pleased to know, Mr. Moss, that was the last of my questions. Thank you. There may be some questions from your own representatives.
Mr. Sanders.
Thank you, sir. Just on the last point about the visit to HM 155's wife, would it ring any bells if I suggested that the difficulty in the issue was financial?
I've noted, I'm sort of going into other realms, I've noted in the evidence given that HM155 mistakenly has said that I went with Martin Gray to visit him, which is inaccurate, and that he says it was to do with his divorce. That's 155's recollection, and he objected to us going to see her. So I suppose it's possible that it's money. I really can't remember after this time.
Very well, thank you.
There is a suggestion that he was not paying the maintenance that he'd agreed to, I think.
Oh, that could be the case, sir. I'm sorry, I really can't remember. I know I'm sort of leading with the chin on behalf of one of my colleagues, but Mr. Butler may be able to help you more when he comes.
Thank you. Did you receive training on the powers and duties of a police constable when you joined the force?
Yes, all police officers, and it was then a national requirement, not a national school. There were a number of police training schools, but you did a 13-week course, taking you right through from the beginning up to you were with exams going through until you were fit to be released onto an unsuspecting public.
And was there then further training on your powers and duties when you joined Special Branch?
No, I don't recall the course that was referred to in the previous session that we saw the part of the timetable from. I don't think that existed when I joined Special Branch. And so I think the answer to that was probably not. The training was done more on a mentoring basis, and my mentor was in fact someone who was giving evidence in this tranche.
Did you understand that when you were an SDS undercover officer and when you were supervising undercover officers, that you and they were acting in accordance with your powers and duties?
We believed so at the time, and I have to say that things I've picked up from this inquiry, having been following it, indicate that maybe that wasn't the case, but I wasn't aware of it at the time.
You were asked if it would be fair to say that no consideration was given to the question whether it was legal to attend meetings in private houses, and you said yes. Do you mean that there was no legal analysis of that carried out, or that you just didn't think about whether it was lawful or not.
Sorry, what did I say yes to?
So, apologies. You were asked if it would be fair to say that no consideration was given to the question of whether or not it was legal to attend meetings in people's homes. Did you mean by that that there was no separate legal analysis, or that you just didn't think whether it was legal or not?
I would say both of those questions. There was certainly, even when I was the Chief Inspector, we didn't take any legal advice that I'm aware of. Well, we didn't take any at all when I was the Chief Inspector. Further back down the line, I don't know whether there was advice on setting the whole squad up. Obviously, Home Office advice was taken. Whether they took legal advice, I don't know. But no, I genuinely didn't see that there was a problem with gaining entry to people's houses in the way that we did. And I'm conscious that Miss Kilroy brought up a stated case which I had no knowledge of whatsoever.
But it was your understanding, leaving aside whether anyone had consulted lawyers to your knowledge, it was your understanding that that was lawful?
Yes, sir.
If you had concerns about the legality of anything that the SDS was doing, was there a route available to you for taking legal advice, and what would that have been?
Yes, the Met Police had its own, still does, had its own legal, it's now called the DLS, as I'm sure you're aware. It's then called Solicitors Department, so we had in-house solicitors, which we could have used. I probably, even as the Chief Inspector, was not at the grade to go directly to them. I had to probably go through senior managers in Special Branch, but I am not relevant to this inquiry. I'm relevant, aware of information, consultations with them over other Special Branch issues later on in my career when we did use it. So they were there and they were available.
You said to the chairman put something to you that taking confidential information, it might not be a question of it being a crime, but it being characterised as a civil wrong. And you said you hadn't thought about that at the time. But again, did you think that taking confidential information was against the civil law?
No, I didn't. I in truth, I didn't give it a thought. But because we were there to garner information, and perhaps it should have occurred to me, but it didn't, that it might have been illegal in one way or another. I didn't think of it.
But your understanding was that it was lawful?
I believed it to be, yes.
Just in terms of the intelligence that the SDS obtained, could Special Branch have obtained the same intelligence from open sources or from other covert methods?
Certainly not from open sources, no, and from other covert methods, even then I doubt it. And other covert methods are actually far more cumbersome than many people understand. I know we're talking in code here, but so I'd say no is the short answer to that question.
Well, there's no need to be shy about what possible covert methods there might be available, because we all know that there's phone tapping and eavesdropping devices and paid informants and so on.
Well, I've touched on paid informants, and they are potentially, they can be more trouble than they're worth. They're difficult to get, and they're even more difficult to manage sometimes, which I think was part of the rationale for the creation of the SDS. And in terms of the other covert methods, they're not. Telephone interception is not a magic way of getting information, because it is actually far more labour intensive than many people realise. And there's a limit, a physical limit, as to even if you're allowed to, as to the quantity of telephone lines that you can eavesdrop on. But I say the strong constraints on what you can do. Legal constraints.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I think as a matter of accuracy, that depends upon the date on which it occurs. After 1985 or 6, the law requires a warrant to be obtained. Before then, practice under the Burkitt Commission's recommendations required a Home Office warrant to be obtained. But one way or another, you had to get high up permission to do it. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
That, I think, does conclude all questions, does it not? And indeed today's business.
It does, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to you for coming, and I'm glad to know that we haven't interrupted your holiday and you'll be able to take it as you'd planned.
Sorry I've made us all finish a little bit later than normal, sir.
Not at all. No, that's perfectly all right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.